Cheers. We're back for another Q&A video. Now let's get into it. So number one question, we've got Jeffrey Rosenberg 7765. They said, what light and softbox are you using? So the light and softbox that I'm using is a Aputure 120D, and I've got the oldest version. In the behind the scenes video we were talking about, we were using a newer version, Mark II. That was Andre's light, and the Aputure Light Dome also. It's a really, really great softbox for balancing actual daylight and artificial lighting. I would say it's not quite bright enough. So in that space, we would have definitely benefited from having either two lights or having a 300D by Aputure. And I have a 300D also for projects like that. I was just traveling and we used Andre's setup. So we had the 120D, and then in the background we had the 60 something. It's a cheaper version. I'll link it down below, but it's pretty solid. Bicolor, so we adjusted it to be a cooler tone to make the skin tones pop from the foreground. So I've had Aputure lights for probably like 4 or 5 years or something, and using them a lot and never had any problems. Okay, another question that I've been getting a lot from some of my behind the scenes videos is why not film with just a drone for your exterior shots, because it's already a wide angle shot. And the reason is normally because I usually shoot at a wider field of view, so like 16 to get some really wide dynamic movement shots, which is wider than a drone. And then I also shoot at a tighter focal length, so like 50 to 75, to get some cool detail shots and isolate some interesting, important details and creative stuff. But for a normal, super simple real estate video that's effective, you could totally use a drone for all your exterior shots if you want to. Definitely could be much faster and save you from being out in the extreme heat for the summer. Next question from behind the scenes videos again is, do you always use a circular polarizer filter? This is summarized from Dead Wax Society, and the answer is as much as I possibly can, because I really like having that control over the glares. You can just get a lot better color saturation in everything, basically, for floors, for plants, for even the interview video I did recently. It brought back a lot of color in Andre's hair. Never seen that before, but I assume also if you have a shaved head like me, you could also bring back some of that skin color if you've got a harsh glare from lighting. So for real estate stuff, definitely for exterior, definitely for interior, for photos especially. If it's bright, I'll use it for video. If it's not super bright, I will take it off for video because it does stop down your light a bit. And sometimes it's better to have a cleaner, better exposure than perfect control over your image for video. And I'll link the one that I'm using now below, which Polar Pro actually sent me, which is really cool. But I also have used some cheaper ones in the past that have been totally great too. I have noticed that the quality on the Polar Pro is better and there's less color shift, and I just really like it. I don't know if I'm biased or not, but just a disclaimer, they did send it to me for free along with the variable ND that I showed in my last video. I'm also using a mist filter that they sent me on this video to make my skin look a little bit softer and things look a little bit more less digital. So filters are fun. Next is a question I get all the time, which is what frames per second is your timeline? This was from Malice Van Roe and a lot of other people over the past couple of years on YouTube. So I always work on a 24 frames per second timeline in 4K and export with those same settings as good as possible. So I know depending on where you are in the world, some people need it to be 25, some people need it to be 30. So you got to figure out what is best for your area and what you need to do. It's really personal preference though. I like how 24 looks. Some people like how 30 looks because it's a little bit sharper and more detailed looking. Some people even like how 60 looks, especially for sports and live action stuff. So you got to do what works best for you and go for it. Another question about frame rates. So Samir6216 says, is there a reason why you don't just shoot in slow motion? So Normally I shoot in high frame rates, so like 30 or 60, and then I slow it down on my timeline, which is 24, to either 80% or 40% to get a smoother slow motion playback. And what they're asking is, why don't you just shoot in the slow motion mode? So usually on cameras it's called S&Q, slow and quick. So depending on what way you're doing it, you could be doing a slow motion, you could be doing a time lapse. That's what that means. So I already answered their comment, but I think the reason that I do that is because usually I'm doing projects where they require audio most of the time. So either documentary kind of stuff, brand videos, behind the scenes content, YouTube content, etc. So I record in that mode because my camera records audio, and most cameras do record audio if you're filming at higher frame rate in normal mode. But if you're filming in S&Q mode, a lot of cameras don't record audio. So obviously, if you only do real estate and you always know that you don't need audio, go ahead and do S&Q mode if you want to, and it might save you some time in the edit. Pretty smart idea. Another question that relates to movement is, how do you stabilize in post? So for me, I usually shoot pretty smooth and how I want it to look. So if that's handheld, I know it's going to look handheld and that's fine with me. Or if I'm shooting with a gimbal, I shoot it to where it is pretty smooth straight out of camera. So a couple things that I do is I usually will slow something down. So this is asking about real estate stuff. So I'll always shoot in 30 frames per second or faster. So 30, 60, sometimes 120, sometimes 24 if I really need low light performance to be better. So I'll slow that down in post to match my 24 frames per second timeline, which slows down some of the motion a bit and makes it less noticeable if there's any shakes or whatever. So I'll do that. So for example, 30 frames per second, I'll slow down to 80% speed. And then if that's good to go, it's good to go. But if it's still a little bit shaky, I will go in and add stabilizer. So in Final Cut, there's just a little button that says stabilization. You click it, it analyzes it. You can adjust how much of the effect you want. Usually I keep it below 1 because sometimes it can start looking weird. But if you're using Premiere Pro, the effect is called warp stabilization. So you just look it up in your effects tab and drag it onto your clip and you're good to go. Same thing. So that's what I do. Just a quick warning though, if you're new to this, always watch it again and make sure it didn't do anything weird to like the corners of your image, or sometimes it'll like track a subject really weird and jumpy. So sometimes having a imperfect shot is better than a weirdly stabilized shot. So sometimes all you have to do to fix it though is just zoom in a little bit, like maybe 5%, and that'll crop out the edges to where you don't see as much of the weird wobbly stuff. So that's it. Otherwise, practice getting better at using a gimbal if you're using one. So this one's kind of funny. This is from a video a long time ago from where I did like a one-take video on my phone of a real estate shoot. Dragonfly Hill Collective 3616 says, how do you open the door? So basically I went from the front yard and then I went through the front door and then I started going through the whole house. And what I did that was sneaky was I had the door a little bit cracked so that whenever I got up to it, I could use either my left hand that wasn't holding the camera, push it open out of frame, you wouldn't see it, or your foot. You can use your foot to slowly, open it with your foot. And then once you get in right past the door, you quickly slam it right behind you, either with the same foot or hand that's not holding your camera at that time. So it's a little bit tricky to pull it off smoothly, but to mask it, you can speed ramp through all that stuff happening and go basically from the front yard to the interior and nobody really notices. So a little bit of a sneaky trick that you can do for doorways, or sometimes you can do that with showers. You can crack it a little bit open and avoid reflections and stuff too. And now on to the most asked question of all time, which is, how do you price your real estate shoots? And we got a few people asking about this. Generally, the equation I use is time on site plus time editing plus travel plus other costs. So like if I have to rent other gear for a specific shoot or want to rent gear, sometimes different houses need different stuff. So you might need to go super wide. You might need to rent a zoom lens, like a 70-200 to get some surrounding shots and stuff like that. It all varies, but I mostly do more like high-end custom stuff. So my pricing ends up being a little bit more like normal videographers, not real estate videographers, like day rates, travel rates, pre-production, post-production fees and stuff like that. So as opposed to like a flat fee or charging per square foot, that's kind of what works for me lately. I'll talk about it more in just a second. I've got another question that's more specific about it. But so in the past, whenever I was just doing real estate stuff, photo and video packages only, I think I would charge starting at like $450. So this would just be like a 2-hour photo shoot, video shoot, where I would go through, just get all the standard stuff, cover everything. I had a flat fee for every shoot. So if they wanted to include dusk photos like sunset, I would add on an extra amount, like $150, I think. And then if they wanted drone, that'd be like another $150. So then at that point, it'd be about $750 for just normal real estate stuff. So that'd be like a medium-sized house. And then if it's luxury and they want extra edits and they want extra time on shoot, if they want lifestyle stuff added in, then it just builds on that. Now we got another question about the same thing from Ashley1776. They're basically asking about lifestyle shoots. So in the industry, that's basically used to talk about real estate shoots that also incorporate people doing things, showing off the lifestyle of either the house or the area, whatever. So more commercial level productions is how I would put it. And the reason it's a really hard question is because quality and value and ROI are all pretty subjective. There's not really a simple way to track that and determine an exact price across the industry. So every videographer has their own value. Every client has their own value. Every house that the client might get off of that video has its own value. So it's hard to really dial that in. But for me, that's too complicated. It makes more sense for me to just charge a day rate for that kind of stuff. So typically my day rate right now is about $1,200-ish, depending on where it's at. So I'll calculate that for the actual production days. I'll calculate more for pre-production days. I'll calculate more for travel days, travel fees, etc. Any costs that come up because I'm going to do the shoot, obviously it doesn't make sense for me to pay for it. And then also post-production. So how many days do I need to edit this and all that stuff? I think for filmmaking and video, corporate video production, that's a pretty standard day amount for a lot of people. So obviously it's up to you and what works in your market, but that's where I'm at right now, at least for some recent projects that I've done. I've done more, I've done less. It all depends. Ultimately, you got to go with what works for you and what the market decides is actually going to work. So if you have a certain price and nobody's hiring you, it's probably a little bit too much, or you're not marketing the right people with the right product. So you got to reassess things based on what's working and what's not working. And in the end, I think you can come up with something that works for you by meeting in the middle a little bit for yourself and for your clients or potential clients. And you can all live happily ever after. That's all the questions for this one. If you have any more questions for future videos, leave them down in the comments as usual. If you got any answers for people's questions, feel free to help them out. I think that's what we're here for, is to help each other out and figure this stuff out together. So anyways, hope this video was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Peace.